as was stated, I was a gymnast back in the 80s. I was an elite gymnast. Elite is the highest level you can compete at in gymnastics that allows you to qualify for national teams and Olympic teams. And I was on the national team for about 8 years. And I was national champion in 1986, and that happened just 9 months after I fractured my femur, which is the thigh bone, at World Championships in Montreal. So on the world stage, I broke it, and it was assumed that I would not come back, and I came back just 9 months later, which probably wasn't a good thing, and won nationals, but I'll talk about that. I wrote a memoir in 2008, Kathy Spear, my agent, about my time spent in gymnastics, and truthfully, you know, it detailed the abusive culture in the sport. It also detailed my love for the sport, which is how it started. But the emotional, physical, and sexual abuse that happens in the sport that's all too common. And I wrote it 20 years after I left the sport because it didn't stop. You know, it didn't stop the effects of the sport, what that did to me, my self-esteem, how I saw the world. And so I sat down to do it because I had to sort of banish the demons in a sense. But when I wrote the book, I didn't really think it would get published. I sort of wrote it in a dark room by myself, and lo and behold, somebody wanted to publish it, and I was not prepared. It was early days of social media. In fact, I think I signed up for Facebook just to sort of help promote the book. It's hard to imagine that world, but that was the truth of it, and I was not prepared. I was absolutely excoriated by the community, the coaches, the fans, the kids, the athletes I had trained with. And I was shaken but not deterred, and I want to talk a little bit about what my time in gymnastics was like and what that time was like and what's happened since then. I want to talk about the culture that led to Larry Nassar. If you don't know who that is, you've not been reading the news. He's the most prolific pedophile, certainly in sports history, but probably in American history. I think there's over 400 victims at this point that have come forward. But I think we need to talk about the culture that allowed for this man to do what he did for 30 years. For 3 decades, he thrived in a safe haven that was the Olympic movement, gymnastics. He did not just abuse gymnasts, there were other athletes, mostly athletes. Only one victim has come forward that was a non-athlete. But there's something wrong, and there's a complicitness in the behaviors of those around him, coaches, sports leadership, Olympic leadership, that enabled him to prey on young girls for 30 years. If we look at what happened in a vacuum and we think this man went to jail, everything's fine, we're safe, then we truly miss the point. And if we don't examine a change in culture that needs to happen to prevent it, it will indeed happen again. And in fact, it's happening across the sport. It's just more diffuse. No one else has managed to rack up as many victims, but they're everywhere. They're all over the place. And based on my observations, and I think Nancy would probably agree, we have not done the soul searching required to actually change the culture. And we can change the laws, and Nancy is fighting hard to do that. I help where I can. But unless we create a culture, a dramatic culture shift to ensure all athletes are safe from emotional, physical, and sexual abuse, it will not change. So a little bit about my time in the sport. I made my first team, a national team, at 11. I moved away from home at 14, so you're very isolated. You're a little kid. I mean, 14's a kid. And I still love the sport at this time, but the training at my new gym intensified, and I just sort of acquiesced to all manner of abuse. We were weighed twice a day. I was training on injuries. I was training 9-10 hours a day. I was training on broken bones, denied food, called names, belittled. This was all in the name of motivation. That's what they thought we needed, and that was how to do it. Despite all this, I started to win, or I started to do better, right? I was, I had been ranking 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, and suddenly I was in the top 3. I was second, I was first. But with every injury, I came back too fast, and I injured myself again. So when I broke the femur, I came back. Broken femur is the biggest bone you got in your body. They thought I did in a car accident. That's what they said. But I came back just about 10 weeks later, which is not enough time, and I injured the other ankle. That ankle was about the size of a grapefruit, and I trained on it that way for 2 years. I didn't know that it was in fact shattered, which is the word the doctor used 10 years ago when he did an x-ray and an MRI when I was 41. He asked if I'd been in a car accident, and how long I'd been incapacitated from the injury. And I said I had done it to myself, and I was not incapacitated at all. I trained on it the entire time. So that's one form of abuse, certainly. But I was surrounded by sexual abusers as well. 2 of the core staff on my team of 8 were known pedophiles, sexual abusers. The national coach at the time was known to be a sexual abuser, and we all knew not to say anything. It's a subjective sport. If you fall out of favor, you don't make the team. You don't get to go to the meet. And if you did say anything, if you wrestled up the courage in yourself to say, I think maybe something's not right, a typical response was, well, we don't know for sure. You don't want to ruin this man's life, do you? But what of our lives? And what of us? And you know, you feel like when somebody says don't talk about it, and you of course don't matter. And that's the environment you grow up in. And I really grew to hate the sport not too long after I got to that gym. It was only 2 years, it felt like a decade. I developed an eating disorder and trying to stave off puberty, which is common in the sport of gymnastics. I ate laxatives by the boxful. I exercised excessively, even outside of the 9 hours or 8 hours in the gym. And I kept to a strict 400 calorie a day diet. I had an ankle that was broken, but I didn't know it. I got cortisone shots every 4 to 6 weeks. The doctor came to the gym to administer them, well past the number that would be recommended by any credible doctor. And I took probably 15 Advil a day just to make it out on the floor. So I became really depressed, not surprisingly, and really disoriented, because this is what abusers do. When you are hungry, they tell you you're fat. When you are tired and have a broken leg, they tell you you are lazy. And so it's gaslighting of the highest order. You don't trust, it's a typical tactic, right? A mother that may hurt her child says, if you don't do that, I won't have to do this to you, I won't hit you. And so you grow up believing it's your fault. I didn't believe I would carry this with me into my life. I thought it's separate, it's gymnastics, I will leave it there, but that's not how it works. You take it with you, sadly. And the last few years have proven that the culture that I wrote about is real. When I wrote the book, that's what everybody said when it came out. Well, that was then, that was the 80s. It's not like that anymore. And I said, but all these people, they're still coaching. I don't think they woke up one day and said, I'm not gonna do this anymore. I knew the culture was the same. When I started to write the book, I had a lot that I was grateful for. I was married, I had 2 children, and the book just sort of poured out of me. And I didn't expect it to get published. I just wanted to make some peace of what had happened in the sport. I thought I wouldn't publish it, but Kathy is a great agent, and so she sold the book. And it came out a few months before the 2000 Olympics. And the response was devastating. Even the people who were supportive said things like, well, you have issues you're working through. Why did you have to talk about the bad stuff? Why couldn't you just talk about the good stuff? Why did you use real names? That wasn't necessary. Well, he's gonna come after you. He's gonna sue you. Well, he didn't sue me, the coach that I called out as a sexual abuser, because he knew it was true. So mostly, that was the good stuff. Those were the nice people. Mostly it was worse. I was called a liar and an opportunist. I was threatened physically. I didn't know what to make of social media. It was new to me at the time. But the general sort of storyline was you're just bitter because you didn't go to the Olympics, which is true. It's not true that I was bitter, it's true that I didn't go to the Olympics. And that I carried this bitterness with me into adulthood, and now I was writing this book to what? I don't know, it doesn't make any sense. That would not redeem me as an athlete, my successes, my failures, but it was an argument meant to silence me, not to make sense. And that's the playbook. If you aren't coerced into total silence because you've been trained to be obedient as a child, and you dare speak out, then you're obviously a liar. That's the way it works. It's the same playbook even outside of sport, right? We've seen that. And hopefully that silences you. But it was a hard time, and I doubted myself constantly, even after having written it, and I thought, well, maybe they're right. Maybe I wasn't tough enough. Maybe this is all just a big mistake. I wanted acceptance in the community I'd grown up in, and this was a surefire way not to get that, and certainly has stayed true over the last 10 years. But now I have friends like Nancy and all the gymnasts that have come forward in the Nasser case. But therapy helped me understand the tactics of the abusers, and that it's not my fault. It was never my fault, and it trained me or taught me to trust my own perception of the world And that if someone is trying to do you harm, and it seems like that to you, that is what is happening. A few years later, Dominique Mossiano wrote a book called Out of Balance. She's a 1996 Olympian, won a lot of gold medals. So their tactic of saying you're just a failed gymnast didn't work. And yet they found other reasons to discredit her, difficult family relationships, etc. But it gave me strength that someone else was out there telling this story. I did a lot of press when the book came out. I was on ABC, CBS, HBO, everything but NBC, who did not want to cover this. And I'll let you ask why, or think why. But another sort of entity complicit in the sort of creation of an image of young girls, pretty little bouncy girls having fun in the sports. I softened my approach when I did press. I said, this is my story, this is not an indictment of the sport, but it was, but I knew not to say that because it was bad enough, even if I said it was just my story. It was self-preservation. And then everybody said, well, that was then, it's not like that anymore, but I knew that it was. But for every disparaging email I got, I also got a letter from someone who said that happened to me, and who felt less alone and ashamed because they had someone who sort of played back their story. So now here we are 10 years later, and we've seen the collapse of USA Gymnastics, or the near collapse. The Indy Star wrote an article about the widespread covering up of abuse within gymnastics, and that gave Rachel Denhollander, who is a hero, the courage to come forward and tell her story about Larry Nassar. And then the calls just came in every day, another call. There were 50 credible claims in a very, very short period of time. And these reporters told the stories. They told all of them. The floodgates were opened, and now there are 400 survivors, over 400 who stand together. And he'll spend the rest of his life in jail. And there are more that will go to jail for being complicit and not listening. I mean, there were people along the way, people say to these women, why didn't you come forward? They did. They came forward again and again in 1997 and 98 and 2002, repeatedly, and people said, you don't want to do that. That didn't happen. He wouldn't do that. You'll lose your scholarship. All manner of reasons why they should not come forward. But I think in being so disgusted around the cover-ups, again, we risk missing the point, which is there is a culture that persists, that if we don't look at, it will allow someone else, and is allowing other coaches to do the same. You have to understand that obedience is literally beaten into us. We're brainwashed into believing that the abuse is our fault. If we were thinner, less lazy, tried harder, cried less, all of these things, they would not make us train on broken bones, not eat any food. It's all our fault. And there was no way I know for these girls who suffered at the hands of Nassar, they were going to say anything. They were so physically and emotionally abused by the time they walked into his office, and he did this thing, which I won't recount. She thinks, okay, this doesn't feel right, but it's me. It's got to be me. I'm lucky to be here. Everybody says I'm lucky. I can't say anything. I'll just endure it. And a lot of the women, and I know many of them personally, it took years for them to realize that what had happened to them was actually abuse. So that is the insidiousness and the completeness of it. It's everywhere. It's in the ether. You are just living in it. Somebody said to me once, it's the water, not the shark, which I thought was a really interesting, I don't even know if that's an analogy, whatever it is. But the athlete carries this with her into adulthood. It doesn't shut off because she's left the sports. She seeks to continue to please, and that cycle continues. And that is the perniciousness, and that is what these women are dealing with still. So I will tell you today, without mincing words, everything I said was true. I am a reliable narrator. It is abusive. My coaches were abusive. They were shown on television in a documentary in 2003, berating and belittling a 7-year-old in a cast for not trying hard enough. There it was on national television. I thought, this is it. This is when it ends. This is when everybody comes forward and Child Protective Services knocks on their door and they say, you're done. And that is not what happened. No one did anything. People ask me, why do they do that on national television? They did it because they don't think anything's wrong with it. And we validated that because we did not do anything. We, all of us, myself included, I was an adult. So that's what needs to stop. things that need to happen, we all have to collectively say this is not okay. The old guard of coaches needs to go. They are everywhere. The John Geddards, the Strausses, who were my coaches in Pennsylvania, the list goes on and on. They've coached this way so long, they can't even see that it's an issue. All the governing bodies, USOC, USAG, all of them, and Nancy's going to talk about this, they need a zero tolerance policy. That's it. Any kind of any kind of abuse, not just sexual abuse, because the emotional and physical abuse sets the stage for that to occur. And I've not heard anyone say we have a zero tolerance policy. I have not heard this. In all of the ranting and raving, no one has stood up and said that. They need to be educated. These coaches operate outside, or did for a long time, outside of the laws. They find safe harbor in these gyms. And we need leadership to make child safety the #1 priority. And you know what? If that means we don't win for a bit, so what? So what? We're damaging children. And the other thing we need to do is elevate the voices of athletes. And Nancy's going to talk about this as well. Unless we hold those athletes up who have spoken out, the younger athletes won't know that that is endorsed and supported, and we still have not done that. All of the gymnasts that you've seen speaking out and winning awards have not been elevated by USOC or USAG. It's been external sources that have elevated them. It's Time Magazine, it's Glamour Magazine. The sport has still not held them up as heroes. And so the message sent to young girls is, don't say anything. You won't make the team. We still have not elevated those voices. Every kid deserves to participate in sport, build healthy minds, healthy bodies, and that is not the current situation we've set up. There are 16 million kids, I learned from Nancy, that participate in the Olympic movement. Of course, most of them won't make the Olympics, but don't they deserve a safe space to train? They do. Your kids probably participate in sports. These kids, do you want to willingly send your kids into this situation? The behaviors we accept on the part of coaches, we would not accept from teachers. They're unacceptable, they're illegal on the part of teachers. So that's all I want to say. My story is true, all of it is true. It took me 30 years to sort of really believe that my story was true and that it wasn't me and it wasn't my fault. And I want us collectively, through legislation as well as culture change, to make those stories a thing of the past.
Sometimes it takes time, but do you think that writing the book helped you a little bit, a lot?
The what?
Writing the book and putting it into words.
It did help. It made it sort of like, it gelled it in my mind. It sort of became real when it was on paper, but even that was not sufficient. I somehow, weirdly, that was meant to kind of put it to rest and move beyond it. I don't work in sports. I have like a regular job, not an athlete. And that was meant to sort of put it behind me, but I somehow then became like a spokesperson, so I get like drawn back into it all the time. It did make it real, but I have to say, I'm a poster child for therapy. I love therapy, lots of therapy. And I, as a sort of thoughtful, introspective person, I am still amazed that I was able to learn so much about myself and my dysfunctional thinking through that process. Because it wasn't that I hadn't contemplated everything that had happened. I had read books, but a good therapist will help you really understand the dysfunction. And I remembered literally the day that he said to me, it's like an abused child. The mother blames the kid. If you didn't do this, I wouldn't have to hit you. Or, a husband who hits his wife because she didn't make dinner the right way. It's her fault if you made dinner the right way. One of the sort of criticisms of me and the book was, why, they were nice sometimes too. Why didn't you talk about that? Which I did. I talked about my love of the sport. But just because they were nice sometimes, which wasn't often, does not mean that they weren't serial abusers. If you hit your wife one time, you're an abuser. And these coaches did not do it one time. So I don't want to focus, they hugged you once to make you forget and make you keep coming back. It doesn't mean that they're not abusers.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, for a very insightful, honest comments. And now we want to go to